When Peaky Blinders introduced Oswald Mosley in Season 5, viewers were treated to a new kind of antagonist, one not born of the underworld, but of Parliament. Played with menacing charisma by Sam Claflin, Mosley brought an aura of unsettling confidence, mixing aristocratic entitlement with fascist fervour. His black-shirted presence disrupted the Shelby Empire, not with gangland violence, but with ideological warfare and political manoeuvring. But how close was this portrayal to the real-life Oswald Mosley? Did Peaky Blinders stay true to the historical figure, or did it take creative liberties in service of its drama? As with much in this brilliant series, the answer lies somewhere between history and myth. Before diving into the TV portrayal, let's set the historical stage. Sir Oswald Ernald Mosley, 1896 to 1980, was a British aristocrat, a decorated veteran of the First World War, and one of the most controversial political figures of 20th century Britain. Starting his political career as a Conservative MP at just 21, he later moved to Labour, then formed the New Party in 1931, and finally the British Union of Fascists in 1932. Mosley's fascism was inspired by Mussolini and later sympathised with Hitler's regime. His rallies often ended in violence, and his anti-Semitic rhetoric grew more pronounced over time. During World War II, Mosley was interned by Churchill's government under Defence Regulation 18B, due to fears about his loyalties. Now, back to Peaky Blinders. When Mosley appears in Peaky Blinders, the year is 1929. The global financial crisis is brewing. Tommy Shelby has entered Parliament as the Labour MP for Birmingham South, and Britain is ripe for radical politics. Enter Mosley, well-dressed, eloquent, and chillingly self-assured. Sam Claflin's performance is icy and restrained. He smirks more than he rants, seduces more than he shouts. And unlike many villains in the show, Mosley cannot be outgunned or blackmailed. His power comes from a shifting political tide, from popular disillusionment, and from Tommy's own deteriorating mind. So how accurate is this depiction? In terms of timeline and political career, Peaky Blinders is almost accurate. The show correctly places Mosley in Parliament during the late 1920s, and by 1931 to 32 it aligns with his real-life formation of the New Party and the BUF. In the show, they make it seem that the BUF, the British Union of Fascists, was formed at the turning of the decade, 1930.
That when the new decade begins, there will be the birth of a new political party which will speak for you. The British Union of Fascists.
In reality, the British Union of Fascists wasn't formed until 1932. Mosley had to have set up and finished with the New Party before the British Union of Fascists was ever formed. This is an oversight that is understandable, given the timeline and the scope of the story that they want to tell. While not being entirely accurate, the overall narrative does lend itself to an authentic portrayal of the period, where they have condensed a number of years together to make a coherent story. In terms of Oswald Mosley himself, his character and his personality, his aristocratic upbringing is evident in his accent, attire, and demeanour. Mosley was known for being flamboyantly stylish, something Peaky Blinders captures with his tailored suits and effortless charm. He was also a captivating public speaker, much like Claflin's portrayal. The real Mosley could stir up a crowd with alarming ease, combining classical rhetoric with bombastic nationalism. Even in terms of body language, gesticulations, hand movements, inflections, Sam Claflin's portrayal of Oswald Mosley giving a speech is, at times, incredibly accurate.
The ranks of our heroes of the Great War have been betrayed again and again by politicians.
Our men of the war, our men of 1914, the grim ranks of our ex-servicemen again and again betrayed by politicians.
And declare that England leads tonight and marches on.
It's more the content of these speeches that undermine the accuracy of the portrayal. The show presents Oswald Mosley's fascism as something that was pretty hardline and pretty well rooted early on in Mosley's career. From the beginning, in his introduction in the show, he is shown to be a fascist, a hardline fascist, one that loves Mussolini, one that wants to make a new fascist party, one that wants to bring Tommy into the world of fascism. This is relatively accurate. Mosley didn't start as a fascist. He started in the Conservative Party, then moved over to the Labour Party. And as he grew more and more infatuated with European ideas, European political ideologies, he began to form his own fascist views, which later led to him forming the British Union of Fascists. This was more of a slow burn for Oswald Mosley, more than a hard-line, well-rooted ideology that he had from early on. What is accurate is that in the show, Oswald Mosley doesn't openly embrace violence as a tactic of political engagement. While he does have Jimmy McCavan and his men from Glasgow come down and be his bodyguards and make sure that all unrest is dealt with, Oswald Mosley isn't portrayed as accepting and utilising open violence as a means for political gain. In fact, he even tells Tommy Shelby, after Linda almost kills Arthur, that any public disagreements, any public acts of violence within the Shelby family would have to be toned down because it was affecting the reputation and had the potential of ruining their political goals. This runs along nicely with the real-world story. Mosley didn't encourage violence early on in his political career. While many of his rallies would have erupted into violence after one of his fiery speeches, that was a pretty common practice at many political rallies and many political events in the British political scene at the time. So it wasn't unusual for a political rally, a political speech, to be followed by some sort of violence. Later on, Mosley does begin to accept violence as one of his tools, having men specifically set up in the crowds to attack, silence, and remove any dissenters to his speeches. In the show, Oswald Mosley seems more focused on power than ideology. As mentioned earlier, one of the areas where the Peaky Blinders show heightens a lot of Oswald Mosley's early views is his relationship to the Jews. In real life, Mosley's anti-Semitism seems to be something that grew over time. Was it there simmering under the surface the whole time? It's hard to tell. But in his political rhetoric, in his political speeches, rampant and explicit anti-Semitism was only something that grew up later in Mosley's political career. As Mosley began to see that being more openly anti-Semitic might actually be politically expedient, his views became more hardline. As he tried to gather in the more extremist support from the political spectrums, the presence of anti-Semitism in his speeches, in his rhetoric, and seemingly in his ideology began to grow. Having Oswald Mosley wander around saying "Perish Judah" or having the crowds chant "Perish Judah" this early on in his career, where Peaky Blinders places him, isn't truly accurate. And while anti-Semitism does later become a key part of the BUF's ideology, it wasn't that explicitly present early on. Again, this is one of those instances where a TV show condenses fact, condenses timelines to make a coherent portrayal of a character and to fit within a narrative structure for the story they're trying to tell. It may not be entirely accurate, but eventually it will become authentic. One of the clearest and most glaring flaws in the accuracy of the Mosley portrayal is the presence of explicit Nazi decorations and banners at Oswald Mosley's speeches. There's not much indication that would suggest that Oswald Mosley had large swastika banners at his rallies and presented himself almost as this Hitler-esque figure with swastikas and the like. Instead, the BUF had very unique, very strong branding of its own. The lightning bolt within the circle. This was their logo. This was their mark. This was the banner that they rallied behind. Swastikas weren't needed. They had the lightning bolt. By introducing Mosley in 1929-31, Peaky Blinders shows him at a moment where he's crafting the BUF and shaping his image. The show's version in many ways mirrors this phase. He is ruthlessly ambitious. He has his goals and his principles. But where the show deviates is presenting Oswald Mosley as the absolute hardline anti-Semitic Nazi figure that he never really was. Claflin's Mosley is a political predator. He toys with people. He smiles as he humiliates Tommy. And he's deeply, disturbingly modern. That subtlety is historically accurate, and even more frightening. What's fascinating about Mosley is that he walked this tightrope, this balancing act between wanting to be completely modern and reinvent the way that the British did government, completely overhaul the parliamentary system, and being a strong proponent of British traditionalism. He was a fan of the monarchy. He supported Edward VIII when he had to abdicate for wanting to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorcee. Ironically, Winston Churchill and Oswald Mosley were on the same side of that argument. So in real life, Oswald Mosley walked this tightrope of progressive modernism and British traditionalism. This is something that is shown really interestingly in the show. Oswald Mosley is all about reputation. He's all about presentation, wearing the right things, being announced at dinners, being present and friendly with the upper classes, making sure that the Union Jack is everywhere that he is, presenting himself as the true heir of what it means to be traditionally British, while also having ideas of overhauling the government, working from the ground up to overturn this government's rejection of the working man, of the veteran coming back from the First World War. And in the show, he takes this even further, buying into the idea of the Jewish world order, something that doesn't come up until later in the real Oswald Mosley's political career. Now, the most dramatic storyline in Peaky Blinders involving Oswald Mosley is, of course, his conflict with Tommy Shelby. Tommy, in Season 5, plots to assassinate Mosley, using his network of criminal and political contacts. But the attempt is foiled in a night of chaos. So, did this really happen? Well, no. There is no historical evidence that Mosley was targeted for assassination by British gangsters or Labour MPs. The idea of a secret conspiracy to kill him is pure fiction, but a compelling one. What Peaky Blinders does, though, is use this fictional conflict to reflect very real tensions of the time. By the early 1930s, there was a genuine alarm about Mosley's rise. Left-wing groups, trade unions, and Jewish organisations vocally opposed him. Violent street clashes between the BUF and their opponents were common, culminating in the 1936 Battle of Cable Street, where 100,000 anti-fascists blocked a BUF march through East London. Peaky Blinders channels that anxiety and opposition, even if the characters are fictional. The Shelby plotline is a dramatised metaphor for a society that wanted to stop Mosley before it was too late. In the series, Mosley's charisma extends to the bedroom. He's portrayed as a sexual predator of sorts, seducing women, using them, discarding them. He's seen as cold, even cruel. Was the real Mosley like this? To a degree, yeah. Mosley had a well-documented reputation for womanizing. He was married to Diana Mitford, one of the notorious Mitford sisters, and their wedding was attended by Hitler himself. Even during his marriage, Mosley had multiple affairs, including one with his wife's sister and stepmother. His sexuality was deeply tied to his sense of power and entitlement. In Peaky Blinders, his relationships with women are shown as transactional, another arena for domination. That portrayal, while dramatised, reflects Mosley's real-life tendencies. There's something hauntingly effective about inserting Mosley into the Peaky Blinders universe. He's a different kind of villain, one the Shelbys can't really understand or outfight. In fact, it brings Tommy to the point where he says,
"Maybe I found him. Arthur, the man I can't defeat."
And in many ways, Oswald Mosley represents the show's ultimate theme: power. Mosley isn't a gangster. He's a statesman. He doesn't run rackets, he reshapes ideologies. And that makes him far more dangerous. In a world where everyone is fighting over scraps of power, Mosley is building a new order altogether. One where men like Tommy have no place. This clash between crime and politics, between individual ambition and ideological movements, makes Mosley the perfect late-game antagonist. He's not trying to kill Tommy Shelby, he's trying to make him irrelevant. Peaky Blinders walks a tightrope with Oswald Mosley, balancing the need for drama with historical authenticity. And for the most part, it does a pretty good job at pulling it off. The timeline is relatively accurate, if condensed. The character is chillingly accurate in his early public persona, maybe a little heightened in terms of anti-Semitic rhetoric. The personal traits, charisma, arrogance, womanizing, are all grounded in a level of fact. And the fictional elements, the assassination plot, the rivalry with Tommy, are dramatic inventions, but they reflect real societal tensions and fears of the time. What Peaky Blinders gets so right is the mood. Mosley's arrival feels like a storm gathering, beautiful, terrifying, and unstoppable. He's the perfect symbol of the 1930s, charming on the surface, but driven by a dark, rising tide beneath. In a show obsessed with power, Mosley is the final evolution. A man who doesn't need a gun to be lethal. All he needs is a microphone.